All right, it's a Friday, and so it's time for show business with the only country journalist in the country, Kenao Shidak. Well, the African Cinema Summit is underway here in Accra, and President Akufo-Addo has called for African filmmakers to tell positive African stories. The admonition has triggered conversations regarding the viability of the local film scene and the underlying issues hindering the promotion of indigenous narratives. And well, Ken is here to help us dissect the problem and explore whatever solutions there are to make the president's call a reality. So great to see you. It's been 2 weeks I've not seen you, but yes. Yeah, I've been monitoring your work. So before we talk about, what the problem is, let's start with what the industry is worth currently here in Africa.
Right. So when it comes to movies, it is a very big part of culture. Mm-hmm. And it's not just globally. In Africa, there are so many stories that filmmakers here have told that have gone global. And when it comes to the segmentation, in Africa, for instance, you find the Nollywood, you find another fragment called the Gallywood here in Ghana. There's also the Kumawood outside there, there's Hollywood among others. But when it comes to how much these, cultural affiliations translate into figures, you realize that there was a report recently in 2021 actually, by UNESCO that was talking about the fact that African films, actually, specifically African films, were contributing about $5 million to the continent's, revenue space. And even with that, they were projecting that was very little because they were actually anticipating that if all frameworks are put in place, it has the potential to reach about 20 billion, from 5 billion to 20 billion if all things be equal. So this report actually threw some light on how much the value of the space is. And so if you really look at the systems that are there, you realize that with these figures, it's also projecting that about 20 million jobs can be created annually in this particular space if the right infrastructure is put in place, basically.
And so let's talk about the president's concerns about telling positive stories about Africa. You'd imagine or you'd think that Africans can tell our own story and tell them positively, but it appears that is not the case. I want to find out why that is the case. Is it that we are not going beyond ourselves to do it, or we just plain trying to follow the West and other countries, what they say about or portray Africa to be?
Exactly. I think the last point you made is one of the most, cardinal points when it comes to the telling of African stories. I think there has been a certain narrative that the culture from the West is always better than what we have here in Africa. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of, filmmakers are portraying the cultural settings of foreign countries, which leaves ours and our customs and our culture kind of lagging. So it makes it difficult for people, it makes it very viable for people to think that if they portray the foreign culture, it's much, it has more potential to sell outside because the target is mostly, the market outside. So it makes it difficult for some filmmakers to target, what we have here in the country. Some people have also attempted to do that and have done that, to some extent successfully, but it gets to a point where investment becomes a problem because you need some, income or some investment to be able to put out a good movie. And so if the source of your investment is, for instance, coming from the West, it's like research. If you are being funded by a certain entity, it's expected that the theory that's created for you is already like the problem that's created for you to solve is exactly the problem of someone else. And so it's difficult for you to tell it from your perspective. And so some experts have said that is one of the reasons why we are not hearing more African stories from the African perspective in our own continent. And also, there is also, the need for education. People have, indicated that in the movie industry in Ghana, right, and Africa, for instance, there has not been a deliberate effort to, rope in professionals in the game. And so it makes it very difficult for them to, they can create the film, they can create the content, but when it gets to a certain level of marketing, it becomes very difficult because they may not have employed the right people to do that marketing, that promotion, amongst others. And so there are very, varied factors that come into play when it comes to the difficulties in portraying our own story.
It could also be the fact that we have not acquired the taste for, local stories or stories about Africans. People want to see something by the West, right?
Exactly. And so there are some of for instance, people have also advocated that when it comes to funding of the industry, it becomes very difficult because it's difficult for you to find various governments on the African continent push funds into filmmaking. And so it becomes very difficult as well, even though they have the idea, implementing it in the film industry becomes another problem. And so it's understandable that people want to see what comes from their area, but it becomes very difficult when funding is also a problem.
30 seconds, what can be done to make African narratives more attractive?
It's a tall list, I should say. But if you say 30 minutes, let's get into
Not 30 minutes, 30 seconds.
30 seconds, I was about
so
to
let's make it a three-pointer. Point number one.
Promotion and consistency in one.
Two.
The second thing, private partnerships, because if government is not funding it that much, I mean, there's private partnership that can also help do that. The third could be, studying the space of intellectual property so that people can make more earnings from what they create.
All right.